On the day Charles Bukowski died, Marla was working the register. Jackson, furious in his grief, rapidly piled the front table with all the Bukowski the store had in stock. Then he made a sign in big black letters that said, Charles Bukowski, he died. So we're having a sale. He faced the sign out to the street. Some people got it, and others were offended by the sign. It was funny, it was Bukowski. How could you, one woman came off the street to say, that man died. She was quite angry. Jackson gave her the blank stare, kept his hands in his pockets. Well, the woman pushed. He's dead, all right, Jackson said, dead. The woman waited a few seconds longer and turned to leave, saying she would not shop there again as she pushed out the door, as if she ever had. Marla felt a bit sorry for the woman, and also sorry for Charles Bukowski, because he had died. And after what kind of life? His enormous purple-veined nose was gone, decomposing. She had read enough Bukowski, sure, but not nearly as much as Jackson had. Like most young men she knew, Jackson felt a kinship to Bukowski. There was a brotherhood. Jackson felt that he could act the way he really wanted to act because of Bukowski. He didn't have to love her. You can go on break now, Jackson said when those three girls on their way home from high school entered the store. She heard them asking him about Bukowski. Who was he, and which of his books were good? They'd been in the store before. She knew the tall black-haired one was the reason. She wanted Jackson. Marla was small, pale and unremarkable. Her bones felt like Q-tips beneath her skin. That was something Jackson had said to her once, a moment of poetry, or so he thought. Her nails were bitten, but Jackson didn't notice that. He noticed the blue veins on her temple. The veins of a toddler, he said, a young child. They had been lying on her futon mattress when Jackson said this to her about her veins. Marla had squashed the mattress beneath the one window in her studio so that she could read with the light of the street lamp and not waste money on electricity. She was proud that her electric bill was so low, her needs so few. Jackson always came to her place instead of going back to his because he had roommates and she lived closer to the store. He often came over after he'd gone out without her even. Mind if I crash? He'd ask as he took off his boots, already assuming the answer. She sat on one of the plastic chairs in the book closet which doubled as their break room. In her cubby was the paper sack lunch she'd prepared for herself earlier in the day. She pulled out a can of peaches and unstuck the lid. She used a plastic spoon to feed herself the peaches. They were soft and sugary in her mouth. A new tongue lying upon her old tongue. She heard the hyper-vibration of Jackson's voice. He was excited, wowing them with his knowledge of Bukowski, making them laugh. She bit through the slice of peach in her mouth, chewed and swallowed it, took another one in and let it lie there. The tongue would speak for her. She would keep it there until she saw Jackson again. This next one is called You Don't Need Love. It's another pick-me-up, so you can tell from the title. They've all got a similar, happy theme. The kitchen did nothing but look out onto the parking lot behind the Asian market. Sometimes there were crates of chicks next to the dumpster. If you opened the window, you could hear the baby birds peeping, their flimsy claws scrabbling against the wood. But there wasn't anything to see, really. And now a man was dead, and Junie was the only one living in the building. The lesbian couple in the apartment below Junie moved out in late August, bless you, leaving her alone on the second floor with only the old lady in the adjoining house. It was April, and the earth was thawing. The man had died in January and stayed cold enough through the winter that she could not smell him. It was not until the first extended stretch of warm days, daffodils blooming softly beneath the willow tree in the old lady's yard, that Junie smelled his unfortunate decomposition. Festering, oozing, layering himself into dust beneath her. All those nights she had lain in her bed, listening to the wind push against the storm windows, wondering about what was next and feeling an unfurling excitement in her ribs. All those nights that she had reveled at being so far from home and all that was familiar to her. He had been there all those nights, dead. Though there would have been some point when he wasn't actually dead. Presumably, he had died there below her. His last breath exhaling upward and through the floorboards and into her room, his last breath forming the shape of a cat, curling into the notch her knees made in sleep. His last breath, a woman dressed in stars above her. The police had questioned her about the man, even though the coroner said he had died from too much drink. A body can't take all that night after night. At some point, the body breaks down, one of the officers said. She felt the police were skeptical about her responses to their questions and that they held her responsible for the man's death. She wanted to assure them that she would not have simply left a body to rot below her. There were places back home, out in the skunk cabbage, deep in the forest, where you could put a body and no one would ever find it. Not here in this city, in these rented rooms below her. She drank vodka as she spoke to the police, shots and shots. The handsome one suggested she slow down. But the old lady's son was visiting, and while Junie had never liked him, she agreed that he could stay with her for an hour or so while she sobered up. The police said they wouldn't leave until she said yes, and so she said yes. The old lady's son was 42 and malevolent. He was named Carl, and he had never been married, and he liked to lean up against his car and smoke cigarettes and bitch to Junie about his mother. She's a cunt, he liked to say, and she always has been. Junie had never heard anyone say the word out loud before. It sounded even uglier coming from his pale, crusty lips. After the police left, she and Carl sat side by side on the couch drinking shots. The window was open and the sun broke through the clouds just as rain began to pour down. I like the sound of rain, Carl said, and took her hand in his. She wanted to let go of his hand, and she did not want to let go. It might have been the only thing keeping her tethered to the room as her head felt balloon-like and swimmy. She was a vapor. Carl pulled her onto his lap, her bottom resting between his thighs. He put his arm around her back and pushed her head down to his shoulder and said, there now. A darling gesture he must have learned from his old cunty mother. Junie hadn't realized she was crying until he did that. Carl stroked her back and held her other hand. She saw that his fingers were lovely, the nails clean and tapered. She didn't know what he did for work. She did not need to know. She would not love him. Junie believed that she could live in the box of her life by herself, and so long as she had air and water and food, she would survive. You don't need love, she told herself in bed at night, lying above a man who was dead or dying beneath her floor, beneath her beating heart. You do not need love, she said, and time will not stop. She'd enjoyed watching it scrabble around in its tank, liked to think it was happy there with her, but perhaps it had been desperate for food or escape. Maybe it had dried into dust and blown away. She picked up the shell and examined the interior, lifted it to her ear. "Where did you go?" she asked. On impulse, she looked outside. A couple of male robins fought on the woody edge of the lawn. One leapt backward, retreating. The other flew mercilessly forward, pecking and clawing. On their honeymoon, her husband had brought her to a cockfight. The dusty alley, a man chewing on a chicken leg, begging them into a tin-sided building. "Where do we go?" her husband asked. The man used the chicken leg to point them to a separate room lit by fluorescence. She supposed he thought it would be interesting for her, so foreign and raw, not a bullfight, but close. Instead, it had left her stricken and unable to leave their room for the final few days of their trip. All of that blood and horror and the men cheering. The dying creature ran headless around the ring before collapsing and convulsing in the dirt. Afterward, she lay in her honeymoon bed with the curtains closed against the tropical sun. She considered her soul. How, in an attempt to flee, it would stretch forth like a rubber band, only to snap back and remain tethered to her. Her soul was not boundless. It was attached to her, as was her own head.